facial recognition, that is what we are going to talk about in this On the Pulse conversation. This is the second part, looking at our second explanatory graphic. And I have here with me today Stephanie Schuckers, who's the director of the Biometrics Institute, but also an expert in the biometrics field. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello.
Good to see you again. So we've already talked about one of our explanatory graphics, the basic operating protocols, but in this conversation, we are actually looking more at the use cases, the operating modes, and data management. So we have the two types of facial recognition that we are talking about, the verification or one-to-one, am I who I say I am? And then identification or one-to-many, which is the data, asking the question whether the data subject is in the database. Now, let's look at those use cases, Stephanie. Let's start with verification. So tell me a bit more about it. And also, we obviously then want to look at the questions around what is happening with the data. Where is it coming from? How is it stored?
Right. So on the left side is the verification, and the mobile device is a good example because everyone uses it, or a lot of people do, where your biometric is stored on your phone, and the data that's captured is compared against that reference. Very simple and straightforward, but it can get more complicated. For example, a passport, it's stored on the passport and you're comparing it against the reference on the passport. And again, that's a one-to-one comparison, but the reference doesn't always have to be stored locally. A reference can also be stored, in a database that's controlled, say, by a bank. Take an ATM machine, right? You stick in your card, but the data could be stored on the card, but it also could be stored at the bank. And so then but there's still just a one-to-one comparison against you and that reference stored in that database. So that's really what one-to-one means, is I've got one thing in the database and the one thing me compared against that.
No, interesting. So we can see once again, it's not that easy to consume when you're not an expert here, and language is so important in this context. So let's move on to identification then. So you've just mentioned this with the passport or with the bank, the credit card, that it's not necessarily just in my hands or in a passport that I hold, but it could still be on a database. But if we're moving into the identification mode now, so what's different here? What are the use cases and how are they different? Because it seems to be very much, again, about where's the data?
Right. Yeah. So moving just kind of one column over to that positive ID column, it's really doing very much the same thing as the one-to-one. But in the case, in many cases, there is a database, and you don't want to have to make a claim to say, like, I'm Stephanie, and then it pulls out just your reference to do a one-to-one. It's much easier if it just is the database and says, oh yeah, Stephanie's in there. And so, some examples of that, school meal access or access to a facility, you just kind of want to walk up and the door opens and that's it, right? Or a trusted traveler, where you can just walk to the gate, and walk right by without having to pull out anything. And so those would be positive ID use cases where it's searching a database, either something stored somewhere in the cloud or even a local database. Say if it's a door, there might be a database just right there in the door, looking for the best match.
And then we have the lovely deduplication again. So what's happening here, Stephanie, if we go into a bit more detail than in the other graphic that we talked about?
Right. So in deduplication, it's different in the sense that usually this is happening at enrollment, and they're making a decision whether to add a new identity into the database. And so what you may want to do is to search the database, number one, to see whether that person's already in it, so they're not re-enrolled as the same person twice, but also to double check that they aren't committing fraud, aren't trying to come in under a new identity. And so deduplication is typically done at the beginning as people enroll.
Very interesting. So a really great tool, obviously, but it is a form of one-to-many as well. So really good to
Yes.
understand that. So moving on to the other ones, tell me more about that, because again, it seems to be, from what I'm seeing here, we're shifting when we look at operation and data storage. There's a bit of a change there. What is happening with the data? So tell me more about that, Stephanie. What do I need to know?
So screening, moves sort of another level, right? Now we're checking against the database, kind of similar to deduplication, but we may actually be looking for specific results, right? In the case of, say, for the immigration, right? We could be checking against people, we wouldn't want to come to the country,
Mm.
and checking and to make sure that match doesn't. So screening, moves sort of another level, right? Now we're checking against the database, kind of similar to deduplication, but we may actually be looking for specific results, right? Forensic is actually quite different, right? Because typically forensic means an event has occurred, usually a criminal event, right? And you've got some information and you want to try to learn more. So
Mm.
the word investigative was added there because now you're searching a database to try to generate leads, that then, an expert could make a decision, does this seem like a match? As well as, the detective could add it with other information to make decisions about how
Mm.
to proceed. And
Mm.
so you can see as we're moving left to right, things are changing now. And there are obviously concerns, around these kinds of use cases, but I think Isabelle will talk a little bit about how to address some of these concerns through some of the stuff that the Institute provides.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, that was part of well, that was the main reason we did these graphics, because there's been a lot of confusion, right? Facial recognition, oh, it's all about surveillance. And then people were starting to throw at us, but we're not doing identification, we're doing verification. And then the people in the identification space were saying, yeah, but we're not doing that type of identification, we're doing this type. So it's very confusing, obviously. So I think seeing here in the green fields what data we are dealing with obviously really helps to understand that. And it's created a lot of debate amongst our members. Still not everyone agrees with everything that is here. And like we have said in the other on the Pulse conversation, the use cases here are only examples. It's not a definitive list. And, we could have a lot more detail here, but obviously, how would you fit that possibly onto one graphic? So we kept it high level. And yeah, some of the systems may also use one or more of these configurations. So it's a complex field, isn't it? So Stephanie, you mentioned, I mean, anything else you wanted to highlight in terms of the graphic? I think it gives us quite a good overview of what is there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add is sort of what makes real-time search so different, than the many of the other use cases. And that's really in that second row of green boxes, is that in that last column, biometric sample captured from public area,
Mm.
right? So rather than, a thing that you choose to do, when you're using your ATM or entering a room, or in a forensic search because a crime's committed. This is just your everyday person walking down the street with knowledge or not knowledge that this is happening. And that's what makes real-time search quite different than most use cases of biometrics.
Yeah, and that's where you really need to build strong safeguards around that, because you can see how people would be potentially concerned that something could happen there, just me
Right.
walking in the street, and I might end up matching someone who, biometrics aren't perfect. And that's a whole other conversation we could have around the error rates and the performance and the demographic differentials that obviously just because I'm someone walking in the street and I match someone who may be a suspect of some description doesn't mean I'm that person. So then we also land in our 3 laws of biometrics. You can't just rely on the technology. You need to think about the policy, what safeguards to put in place, and the process, what controls you have. So yeah, there's a whole lot more to talk about. And hopefully outlining in this graphic these different use cases provides some clarity. Where are the higher risk uses of facial recognition that really need to have strong controls and safeguards and audits built around them? So yeah, it's very interesting, Stephanie. I think we'll leave it here just to say there is obviously more information, not only from the Biometrics Institute, but from other organizations. It's really amazing what knowledge is available in our biometrics world, but it's also slightly overwhelming because there is so much you need to know. And so the Biometrics Institute has published a good practice framework, which then helps to point to other reference points. And there's a whole other range of documents around vulnerabilities and privacy and digital identity. And we'll add a further reading list to this On the Pulse conversation. Stephanie, it's been a pleasure. And thank you for making it so easy to understand. And congratulations on a fantastic project that we will continue to discuss at future meetings, I'm sure.